Us for interviewing skills for graduate students. This workshop is going to be recorded. The workshop's brought to you today by the College of Graduate Studies and the Career Center. My name is Carrie McKnight, and I am a senior career counselor in the Career Center. I'm also the Career Center's liaison to the College of Graduate Studies. So I do a series of workshops and programming just for graduate students in partnership with Graduate Studies. We do not have a representative with us today from Graduate Studies, but I am joined by Winnie, who is a peer student assistant in the Career Center. And Winnie's going to be helping me today with, there's Winnie, hi. Helping me today with managing chat. She's also going to be sharing in chat a sign-in form, a check-in form, a Google form, and please fill that out. That helps us track attendance. And if you fill out that form, you'll receive the recording and a copy of the presentation slides. So again, and Winnie will be also helping me manage questions and checking in with her throughout, making sure I'm answering questions and seeing things in the chat. So again, our topic today is interviewing skills, strategies for success. Hope today to give you some tips and resources for interviewees, so if you're interviewing for jobs or internships. Maybe some of you are graduating and have some interviews lined up for full-time jobs. So we're going to go through and talk about some tips and strategies for interviewing. And feel free to put questions in chat. Again, Winnie will help me manage that. And then I have a couple points in the presentation that I'm going to ask you to share some information in chat as well. So let's get started. So interviewing, I know, is everybody's favorite topic and favorite thing to do is interviewing, and most of us get nervous at interviews. And so I hope today to give you some strategies and tips to maybe help prepare you, maybe help alleviate some of that nervousness that most of us feel in job or internship interviews. So what is an interview? Really, basically, it's a two-way conversation. The interviewer will clearly be leading the interview and ask most of the questions, but it's also an opportunity for you as a candidate or interviewee to ask questions and learn more about the employer and about the opportunity. So it's also a good way to determine fit. So it's for the interviewer or the employer to determine if you are a good fit, and also for you to determine if this opportunity or this company or this organization is a good fit on your end as well. And it's also a marketing opportunity. So it's an opportunity for the interviewer, the employer, to tell you all the great things about what they do and their company, their organization, learn more about you, and also, again, opportunity for you to share a bit more about yourself and your skills and your strengths, and to express interest, enthusiasm about the opportunity, and again, ask questions yourself about the job or the organization to make sure it's going to be a good fit or good opportunity for you. I want to start first by just talking about types of interviews. There's a lot of different types of interviews. It's more and more common now for employers, especially around here in Silicon Valley, to do multiple interviews. So you might be in an interview process that goes to, up to like 5 interviews. I hear that from students now more and more about multiple interviews, and it's usually kind of a phased process. And not all organizations are going to do that many. Maybe some will do 2, but definitely be aware that it can be a multi-phase process. So usually what starts off, the first interview is typically a phone screen interview, where now it's going to be maybe like 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes with just some basic general questions. They just want to maybe verify some information that you submitted in your resume or application. They want to gauge your interest in the job or the opportunity. So it's just kind of a quick getting to know you. You might have an opportunity to ask a few questions in the phone screen, but usually, again, that's pretty short. And it's a good way for the employer to kind of narrow down the number of applicants. And the next phase might be a video interview, perhaps over Zoom or Teams, where it's maybe a little bit longer than the phone screen, maybe an opportunity for you to ask more questions. They might dig a little deeper into learning more about you and your background and your experience. Sometimes instead of the phone screen, it might be a Zoom or Teams interview to start off. Or maybe the organization or company will just jump straight to in-person after the phone screen. So they're all a little bit different, but just be prepared for different modalities and different types of interviews that might go throughout the interview phase. One-on-one, in-person, or virtual interviews are really most common. So that's usually when maybe about an hour. They have a more in-depth questions, a little bit longer interview. You would have an opportunity to ask more questions. You'd be prepared maybe to ask about 4 or 5 questions. That might be with a recruiter or HR person, maybe the hiring manager, but sometimes that comes in a little bit later in the process. If you can find out who's interviewing you, and check them out on LinkedIn, try to learn a little bit more about who they are, if that's possible, if you're given a name of the recruiter or HR person that's doing the interview. So that's usually kind of like phase 1 to 2 phase. What happens after that might be more of a opportunity to meet more hiring managers or HR staff members. There's group interviews. This don't really happen that often, but I hear about these from time to time where it's multiple candidates with multiple interviewers all in one space. It's like a large group interview. It's used often to help the employer kind of see how you interact with others, how you might react in kind of maybe a high pressure situation, but it doesn't happen that often. Group interviews are sort of a bit more unusual. But panel interviews are pretty common, and this might be later in the phase of the interview process where you have multiple interviewers and one interviewee, and you might be virtually or in person with multiple interviewers. And it's good to try to remain eye contact with each person, acknowledge each interviewer throughout the process. Again, if you can learn about the panelists ahead of time, check them out on LinkedIn so you know who's going to be interviewing you. But those are kind of the most common types of interviews: phone screen, video, one-on-one, and maybe a panel or group interview. Again, the group interviews are fairly uncommon, but panel interviews are pretty common. And particularly like in higher ed, for example, at San Jose State, we do a lot of like panel interviews for our candidates. Okay, so what are employers looking for in an interview? So they've already know about you. They've looked at your resume, your application, your cover letter if you've submitted one. Maybe they looked at your LinkedIn profile. So they know that you're qualified and they already know a little bit about you. So they're really trying to, again, dig a little deeper. And they want to find out, verify information on your resume, verify the information that you've submitted. So can you do the job? Do you really have the skills or qualifications, experience that they're seeking? Will you do the job? Are you still interested after you've gone through maybe multi-phase interview? Are you still interested? Are you still enthusiastic about it? So are you still wanting to continue with the process? And then how will you fit in? How will you fit into their work environment, into their work culture? So having you come in person perhaps, or maybe having a tour of the company or organization, or talking to a variety of different types of employees to gauge whether or not you would be a good fit in their work environment. So those are the kinds of things that they're trying to get at. So verifying information, making sure you're really qualified, making sure you're really interested, and then figuring out whether or not you're going to fit into the teams or groups or their work environment of that employer. So let's think about how to get ready for an interview. So one of the most important things is preparing in advance. So all the things I mentioned, be prepared for different types of interview modalities and situations, being prepared for that, and also just getting ready for the interview itself. And really one of the most important things you can do is do some research in advance. So you probably already have done some research into the company or organization or the employer when you're writing your cover letter or, tailoring your resume, assuming you would have already done some research then, but then you want to do a little bit more. And you might be applying to multiple positions. So it'd be like refreshing yourself on this particular employer before you go to the interview. So making sure you understand their mission, their values, their vision, their goals, looking at their social media, looking at their LinkedIn page, seeing if they have any videos about their work environment or information about their CEO or their directors, really understanding who these people are and what this organization's all about. That will help you prepare questions to ask, and then just help you think about maybe what they might ask you if you have a more of an understanding about who they are. What are some of their initiatives? What are some of their goals? Are they mentioned in the media? There's some articles about them. Try to do some research and really understand who they are and what they're all about. Then go back and review the job description again. So if you're applying for multiple jobs, a good idea to maybe have a spreadsheet where you can save links to the job postings or ways to go back and review them again before you go for an interview. So go back in and look at the job description or internship description again. Match up skills and qualifications to what they're seeking. So be prepared to talk about what your skills are, what your strengths are, what your accomplishments are, your various qualifications, and how that connects to their job description. Again, you probably had already done that when you were tailoring your resume or customizing your cover letters, but you want to go through that process again and take some notes so you're ready to kind of do that match and share what you have to offer as relevant to what they are seeking. And then prepare to tell your success stories. So reflecting on your accomplishments, reflecting on, what you're doing in your graduate program, maybe your experience, your work experiences, your volunteering, your internships, the activities and things you've been involved as a graduate student. Really reflect on those. And also think about what challenges you faced or problems you solved. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into talking about behavioral questions. So be prepared to tell your story, your career story, your success stories. You might want to take some notes so you can review those notes before you go into the interview. So research the company organization, understand who they are, understand what they're looking for, how that connects with you and what you have to offer, and be prepared to share your career story and your success stories as relevant to your graduate program, work experiences, or other work experiences that you might have. So we're going to talk a little bit now about different types of interview questions. So there's basically kind of like 4 categories of interview questions that you may be asked. It's obviously hard to know exactly what they're going to ask, but you can kind of determine a little bit what are some common questions, what are some typical behavioral questions that you may be asked that you can prepare for and practice for in advance. So common general questions are what's here on this slide, like what are your skills, what are your strengths, why you're interested in working here. General common questions is one category. Another category of questions is behavioral questions. So those are the tell me about a time when you dealt with conflict or challenging situations. So behavioral or situational questions you most likely will be asked. Maybe not at the beginning, like in the phone screen interview, but usually later on in the one-on-one or the panel interviews, you'll probably be asked some behavioral situational questions. Then another category of question is knowledge-based or technical questions. And those would be very specific to that particular job or internship or organization that you're applying to. And that's why it's good to go back and look at the job description again, look at the website of the company, and really understand what they're looking for. And those would be those more technical or knowledge-based questions. And you should kind of glean some ideas out of reviewing the job postings. And the fourth is kind of unexpected or unusual questions. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how you could prepare for this kind of, the questions that kind of come out of left field, those unusual kinds of questions. So again, common questions, behavioral, knowledge-based or technical, or unusual, unexpected questions are the 4 types of questions you want to practice and be prepared for. So you see here on this slide is some common questions like, what are your greatest strengths? What are your greatest weaknesses? Tell us about your skills? Maybe walk us through your resume, those kind of general sorts of things. Why are you interested in working here? Why did you apply for our position? What are your career goals or what are your career aspirations? How does that connect with our opportunity, with our job, our internship? And of course, the very common question that usually starts off every interview is, tell me about yourself. So that's that introduction that happens right at the beginning of most interviews. You might have to do it multiple times if you're meeting with various different interviewers or going through the kind of phases that we were talking about a few minutes ago. So that tell me about yourself is really important. And it's basically kind of like an extension of a professional pitch or elevator speech, like those little short introductions you might do like at a job fair or recruitment event or networking event. It's really kind of an extension of that. So you can, practice that. We'll talk a bit more about the tell me about yourself. And you can go on some of our resources, and Winnie will be sharing at the end of our talk today some resources, our interviewing guide, also Big Interviews, our interview prep website. There's common questions in there that you can practice and be prepared for. But let's talk a little bit more about tell me about yourself. This is really important because it's usually right at the beginning of the interview. And it basically kind of sets the stage for the rest of the interview. It's usually when we're most nervous. We've just logged in or we're on the phone for a phone screen or we're in person at an interview. It's usually the first thing is just going to introduce yourself. So this is a really important part of it. Again, kind of sets the stage and the tone for your interview. If you can get through this confidently and smoothly, it really can help a lot. I really suggest practicing that. And you can practice with us at the Career Center. You can make appointments, and Winnie will be sharing information about how to make an appointment for mock interviews. And also we have the Big Interview site that we subscribe to that you can do recordings of yourself. And I know there's a lot of AI tools and things out there as well that you can use to practice. So start your practicing with the tell me about yourself. And here's some things on this slide that would be really important to cover. And you want to keep this very short and concise, 1 to 2 minutes at most. A common mistake is to, because we're nervous at the beginning of the interview, is to go on and on and on the very beginning and kind of tell a whole life story and share all this information about our experience and our qualifications all at once. And then you don't have much else to talk about the rest of the time because you've shared it all at the beginning. So that's a common mistake. Another common mistake is the opposite, to be really, really short. So you've got to find that medium, which maybe is about a couple of minutes, maybe 3 minutes at most. Here's some things on this slide that you definitely want to cover. If you're a current student, you want to maybe start out by saying, I'm a graduate student in MSW's program. I'm a second year student at San Jose State working on my master's in social work, something like that to start out at the beginning. And then you want to do a couple of other things. So you want to maybe get a little bit of back information about what you're doing now, like maybe you're working or interning, you have a campus job or you're interning, maybe a little bit about possibly you're volunteering, have some relevant volunteering experience, you're MLIS student, you're volunteering at your local library, maybe you want to touch on that briefly. Or maybe you've got a project, a notable project, or engineering student, you've got a notable project you're working on right now. You maybe want to touch on that very briefly. Not tell the whole thing because you want to, again, save that for later, but maybe touch on that. And maybe a bit about your background. I have over 5 years experience, working in the mental health field or, something like that. Just a little bit about your background. Again, they have your resume, they've seen your application. You don't need to tell your whole story there, but a bit about your background. And the good way to wrap it up at that point is to how does this job or internship tie into your goals? So you might be mentioning a little bit about your career aspirations, your career goals, where you're headed in your career, and how their opportunity, this job or this internship that you're interviewing for, how that, ties in or aligns with your own goals. So get a couple of minutes. So what you're doing now, your graduate program, maybe working or interning, a little bit about some of your background that's relevant, and how this all aligns and ties in with your goals or kind of the next steps in your career. And you might have an opportunity to say more about goals. That's a fairly common question. They might ask you, where do you see yourself the next 2 to 5 years, or tell us a little bit about your career goals. That might come up again. So you could just touch on it briefly in the tell me about yourself. We'll take a moment now and have all of you share a little bit. So do you have a introduction that you use? And if you want to just pop that in chat, or just what comes to mind right away, or maybe just like your elevators or a speech or professional pitch that you've used that you maybe would expand on for your tell me about yourself. But again, this is super important to be ready to go with this and feel confident in this, so this goes smoothly. Again, kind of sets the stage of the tone for the rest of your interview. And if anybody has anything to share on that, or any questions related to tell me about yourself. And we'll see if anything's coming in. Anybody has an example to share or any questions, or maybe you have something to share that's worked well for you in your introduction, a tip that's worked for you, that would be great as well. And see if anything. Okay, I can give everybody a moment to think about that. Yeah, sharing of your own introduction, questions, or what's been working for you. And these are good things, again, to practice like a shorter version of this for job fairs. Like we have our last job fair of this semester next Tuesday. And so, this would be a good thing to practice a shorter version of this if you want to attend our job fair or some of our other recruitment events, to have a introduction ready to go. Quiet. Okay, we're quiet so far. Was I missing something? Okay, think about it and feel free to share that. I think it's helpful for us, to see other students, how we're all introducing ourselves or what's worked for us. So, just continue to think about that and share any of that in the chat. Let's see if I've got something maybe here. How should you approach tell me about yourself when your current work isn't related to the position you're applying to? I think it's fine to just mention, I'm currently doing XYZ, but I'm transitioning or shifting into this new career field. I mean, clearly, I assume that would be on your resume, so they would already have known that maybe you are doing something different. So I think it's okay just to just briefly touch on it and maybe just connect the dots. If my thought is maybe you're in a graduate program now and you're switching just to kind of different career field or industry, so you could touch on that, maybe why you're making the decision to switch. Or maybe there's some transferable skills in that current job that you could maybe touch on that at the beginning or somewhere in the interview to show that, yeah, these are some transferable skills or strengths I'm developing out of my work, even though it's not closely related. I'm at work right now, so I can't give an elevator. Okay. 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 Sometimes there's sort of changes, sometimes just little tweaks here and there. Okay. Thank you. Great. And then is stating your name. Yeah. I don't, yeah, you wouldn't state your name. The time you would state your name is like the elevator speech or professional pitch at a job fair because they don't know who you are. You're walking up to their table. But at an interview, they already know your name. So I would just start with like your graduate program or some of the things that are on that previous slide. Okay, thank you for sharing those things. Feel free to keep popping things in chat if you have an example or a tip or something you'd like to share. Okay, so this is something important to practice in terms of common questions. Another common question that students often ask about or concerned about is what is your biggest weakness? Sometimes phrased as what is like an area of challenge or growth for you. You may or may not be asked this question, but it's certainly a good idea to be prepared just in case. Again, they might phrase it in a different way, like what is something that's challenging, or what is an area of development or growth for you, or then maybe they'd say a weakness. So I get, when I meet with students about interviewing, this is a question that is often asked. So here's some tips on how to approach the weakness or challenge area question. So pick something that's authentic. You want to be honest. There's something that's true, authentic to you, but maybe not super critical to the job. Like if it's the main skill or competency they're looking for, maybe that's not, the best. But pick something that's authentic and true to you, but maybe not super, super critical to the job, but it has some relevancy. And how you want to go about this is use what's called the sandwich method. So mention what this weakness or area of growth or challenge for you is, and then follow up with mentioning what you're doing to kind of improve that area or develop that skill, and what's kind of the positive outcome or result of what you're working on. And again, they're just trying to get to know you. They're trying to find out, it's kind of around self-awareness. Are you self-aware enough to understand that everybody has weaknesses or things we can improve upon? And what are you doing about it to improve it? How are you kind of handling your own career development and self-awareness, being self-aware around that? So you could mention, I'm working on my public speaking and I've joined the San Jose Toastmasters, or I'm taking a course on LinkedIn Learning to develop this technical skill or develop this competency area. You have free access to LinkedIn Learning. I hope you all know that. So, you might check that out for some skill development. So again, something that you're aware of and something that you're working on, and what's the outcome, or how is that going for you? And then just showing that personal growth, career development, and then that you're constantly working to improve your skills and get more experience. And that's essentially what you want to do about that. You see some common mistakes here saying denial of any weaknesses. You definitely want to have some things to talk about there. Something that's a red flag maybe, or kind of saying something like, I'm a perfectionist, like that, something that's a weakness, but it's really not, so try to think of something authentic to you, something that you're working on, or if you're not working on it, pick up a course or join a group or something to help improve that area, and then just describe that, the improvement and how you're working on it. Feel free to, if anybody has an example of something they've used. Well, thank you. I see there is a introduction, a tell me about yourself in the chat. Thank you for that. Ruth, looks great. Thank you. Anybody has an example of something they've used in an interview that was like a weakness or challenge area, and that's something you're working on? Feel free to share that with others so we can get some ideas for ourselves. But again, have something ready to go. You may or may not be asked this question, but it's important to just in case to have something so you're not, kind of taken aback and just not know what to say. So any examples? Okay, so those are some common questions to practice. The tell me about yourself, of course, any common questions that are in our interviewing guide that we're going to be sharing with you, or any common questions that you can practice on the big interview side are great. These are just a couple that I pulled out because these are questions I get a lot from students when I meet with students about interviewing is, how do I introduce myself at the beginning? I'm always really nervous and not sure what to say, and then always concerned about how to address any kind of weaknesses. So yeah, but lots of different common questions or general questions that we recommend you practice and be prepared to answer. And then, again, maybe having some notes. A good way to go about doing some notes for these types of questions is maybe not write out an entire script, because then you might feel like I've got to memorize all these things. I always suggest to students just to do like bullet points or even keywords, and so that you can just remember those, or have them, with you. You can take a quick glance at to help you stay on track, through the common questions or other questions as well. Okay, yeah, feel free to share any examples in there, chat. Okay, so I mentioned again, there's four kind of categories of questions that are typically as part of interviews, depending on if it's a longer interview, shorter interview, you might not get all of these four different types. So again, there's the common general questions, the behavioral situational questions, knowledge technical questions, and then the kind of unexpected unusual questions. The behavioral questions, again, is another area that can be a little stressful. I know is concerned about, how am I going to answer these questions? How do I go about this? This goes back to the earlier slide of like telling your success stories or telling your career story. It's basically what behavioral or situational questions are all about. And they're called behavioral questions because it's the idea that you're going to give an example of how you behaved or responded or reacted in a current or previous work environment or other type of situation as a predictor of how you may behave or respond in their work environment or at their job or their internship or their opportunity. So they want to hear a little bit about your past or something's happening recently with you. Again, kind of get a deeper understanding of who you are and how you might react or respond in their work environment. And this usually starts with, tell me about a time when you. And so this is when you would need to have some scenarios prepared to describe how you faced maybe challenging situations, how you solved a problem, dealt with conflict, things like that. And this is something to think about in advance. Most likely, some point in the interview phase, you'll be asked some kind of situational scenario, behavioral questions, becoming more and more common. Used to be not that common that that these questions would be asked, but that a lot of different companies, organizations ask these kinds of questions. So you definitely need to be prepared to respond. So here's a few examples of these kinds of things. So tell us about the time you worked effectively under pressure. So they kind of want to know how you handle stress, how you handle high pressure situations. So reflect and think about, high pressure, stressful situations, how you've handled that. Very typical to be asked about something to do with conflict. So tell me about a time when you handled conflict with a client or coworker. So this is, asked quite often because of, a lot of work environments, you're working collaboratively with others, or maybe you have customers or clients you're working with. So think about how you handle conflict with a client, coworker, team member, group member, and then these could also be different types of scenarios. So it doesn't always have to be paid work experience, right? You could give examples of conflict with a teammate at a group project in your graduate program, or maybe a volunteer experience with a client or customer where you're volunteering. It doesn't have to be paid work experience. So just think of just different scenarios at school, at work, volunteering, different types of activities you might be involved. They just want to understand how you would handle conflict or how you would resolve it. You're probably going to get questions about problem solving. That's a top core competency that employers are seeking across industries. How do you solve problems? So, tell us about a time you use creativity to solve a problem. Maybe you missed a solution to a problem, or maybe how you anticipated or averted possible problems. So talking about problem solving, talking about maybe critical thinking would be similar kinds of questions, would be really important to practice those as well. Or tell us about time you're unable to complete a project on time. So they really want to understand like how you manage your time, how you manage your work, how would you deal with something like, maybe missed a deadline, or how do you organize your work, things like that. So there's lots of different types of behavioral questions. I suggest using the big interview. They've got lots of examples. They also have a lot of videos you can watch to give you tips on how to respond to these questions, how to prepare for behavioral questions. And then you can also record yourself practicing those. And again, you can also make an appointment to practice, mock interview with us at the Career Center as well. But definitely be prepared to, talk about these scenarios and situations that you might have been involved in. The bottom of the slide says question themes. So these are the themes that employers are typically trying to understand about you when they're answering these behavioral questions. So again, it's impossible to anticipate all the questions that you might be asked in an interview, but if you think about these themes, then it might give you some guidelines, and also using resources like Big Interview give you some tips and guidelines about what kinds of behavioral questions you might be asked. So the themes are problem solving. I already mentioned that. You'll probably get some questions about problem solving. Time management. So how you manage, organize, prioritize your work, meeting deadlines, having competing deadlines, so forth. So how you manage, prioritize, organize work. Being collaborative. Just about every job, there's some kind of collaboration and teamwork. I mean, some aspect of you'll be working with others in teams and groups, so collaboration. So giving some examples of how you've done some collaborative work or teamwork. Having leadership ability is really important to a lot of employers. So you see this one tells about a time when you persuaded team members to do things your way. That's an example of leadership. Even if you haven't been like in a leadership role, like a supervisor or manager, you've used leadership in various ways as a graduate student, or maybe as a volunteer, or maybe you're involved in student organizations and you have a leadership role in a student org. So, leadership can show up in different ways. And so having some examples of your leadership ability. Decision making. Tell us about a time you had to make a quick decision, or tell us about how you process decision making. What's your decision making approach? So that's another theme. Talked about conflict management. That's a theme, really important. So think about that. And then just generally, they're just trying to get understanding of your interpersonal skills. So working with others, the collaboration, conflict, etc. How you approach your work, and what are your interpersonal skills, and important to employers. And that kind of goes back to that fit, the cultural fit. So they're just trying to understand how you're going to fit their teams, their work environment. So if you think about these themes and then practice, maybe making some notes or bullet points about some scenarios you want to describe, and then kind of work them through and practice is one of the most important things you really can do before an interview, is practicing. If it's with a friend or family member, or us in the Career Center, or recording yourself on Big Interview, practicing is really one of the most important things that you want to do. So you've probably heard of the STAR method. And this is a good way to approach preparing for behavioral questions, scenarios. And then also you can use STAR method for like resume writing, like writing accomplishment statements. You've probably heard of this. Sometimes it's called the CAR method or PAR method. All pretty much the same type of thing. So you want to think about, what is the situation? So set the scene, give details, the necessary details of a situation or task. Describe what you're responsible for. Again, it doesn't have to be all paid work experience. It could be group projects in your graduate program, other projects you're working on. Could be in an internship experience. So describe the situation and task. You don't want to get too much in the weeds with this. When I practice with students for mock interviews, often they're these very elaborate, long, sort of detailed scenarios and situations about just the facts, just the basics of the scenario or situation of the task. The things they really want to know about is on the A and the R, the action and the result. That's really should be what you're focusing on. A little bit of detail to set the scene, set the stage for what this is about, and then get into how did you respond? What actions did you take? What steps did you take to solve a problem, to deal with a conflict, to manage a project? And then key part, here's the result. What was the outcome? Just like your accomplishment statements on your resumes, you want to have that result, that outcome. Maybe it's a quantifiable outcome. Those short accomplishment statements we need to have on our resumes. The same kind of thing here is what was the R for the result, outcome. What was the positive outcome or result of that scenario, that situation? So they really want to hear that. How did you solve that problem? How did you deal with that, difficult, client or customer? And then, what was the outcome of it? So this is a good way to go about it. So you might want to just think about those themes that are on that previous slide. What are your situations, tasks, scenarios that are relevant to those themes? If it's problem solving, if it's leadership, time management. And take some notes with those scenarios, situations. How did you respond? What was your action? What steps did you take? And then what was the outcome or result of that? And it's a good way to practice. And again, we have our resources and our interviewing guide on the big interview to help go through the STAR method and practice that. The PAR and CAR method is problem, action, result, or challenge, action, result. Sort of the same concept there. I don't know if there's something coming in chat. Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. There's about roots there. Okay, thank you. Okay, any questions about behavioral or maybe tips that you want to share in chat with other students? Like maybe something that's worked for you to prepare for behavioral questions? Are you using STAR method or using something else? Anybody have any questions or tips for other students? See anything? Again, we have resources to help you practice these things. And then you can always schedule appointment. I do mock interviews with students. And, often this is a kind of a focus point is like, how do I get ready for these behavioral questions? No, not really. I see your question, Sammy. It's STAR only for behavioral questions. I mean, not really. I mean, you could really use it just to kind of think through even answering common questions or knowledge-based questions. What are your technical skills? How did you use your technical skills to respond to a challenging situation? I mean, it really could be kind of used to really preparing for interviewing in general. Plus, as I mentioned, a way to, prepare to write like accomplishments or talk about accomplishments during an interview. Yeah, we will be sharing at the end of the session. We're going to be sharing a link to how you can schedule appointments. Thank you for that question. Great. Okay. So yeah, so you'll be getting the slides, you'll be getting the recording, and then we're going to be sharing some links at the end about our resources and how you can schedule appointments sometimes students schedule appointments just to talk about interviewing, like they just don't want not necessarily do a mock interview, but just want to talk through how do I prepare, how can I anticipate certain questions, so that's also an option as well, is just to have an interview discussion to help you get ready. Okay, so good. So I mentioned there's different types of questions. One interview questions that typically come up at some point within an interview process. I'm curious from all of you, have you been in an interview where you're asked kind of an unusual, like I mentioned, kind of out of left field question that's come up for you? And I'd be curious to hear from any of you if that's happened, in an interview, like something that's been unexpected, that kind of threw you off. If anybody has an example of those. And there's sometimes they're kind of silly, kinds of things. They just want to see how you respond to something that's a little kind of a bit of a curveball or something kind of unusual that's come up. Does anybody have an example of an unusual question? These are probably the hardest, in a sense, to prepare for because, you could figure out what the common general questions are, most part behavioral. You can look at those themes and practice. Knowledge, technical, if you know your industry, you kind of anticipate, they're going to ask about these skills and strengths and things like that. But these curveball questions can be challenging. Okay, do you think the glass is half full or half empty? Yeah, that's one. So kind of just try to get to know you a little bit more about your personality style, kind of like how you might respond to something a little quirky that might come up in an interview. How would you sell me this pen? Oh gosh. Yeah, so those are some of the things that might come up. And there are sites out there that, do give examples, and you can do some research to find out some of those kind of unusual questions, but definitely something just to think about and just mentally prepare that might come up for you. What is your favorite book? Yeah, that's good. My book's definitely sense for library information science. And if I know what type of retirement fund my company has and how it works. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, well, the questions for them, that's going to come up. I mean, most especially when you get into the longer phases of the interview, you'll have opportunity to ask questions. You definitely want to have some questions. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Let's say Kafka couldn't think of a single title. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. You can get caught off guard for those. So it's a little bit challenging to prepare for, but just kind of having it on your mind, something like this might come up. Here's some reasons why they might do. They want to see your creativity, maybe your logic, how you think about something. Maybe they're trying to get a sense of your values, again, your personality style, how you respond to something kind of working under pressure, that something maybe throws you off a little bit. And then how to respond prepared. Expect the unexpected. It might happen. try to be authentic as much as possible, and then just try to, take a deep breath and try to stay composed. It might happen. I don't think happens a lot, but it's just something to have some awareness around. There might be something that pops up a little bit unusual. But thank you for sharing those with me. And again, just think of it a sense that they're just trying to get to know you a little more. How you respond to something kind of silly or quirky, or maybe respond to something that's just unusual, and how would you react? So if you just try to stay composed and be authentic. And you can also, one thing you can do in an interview is ask for clarification. You could ask, am I understanding this question? Maybe ask them to reframe it or repeat it. That can give you a moment to catch your breath and think through it a little bit. Hopefully you don't freeze and can't think of a book title. That sometimes those things happen to us. So I think if you can always just ask them to, am I understanding this question correctly? Maybe ask them to repeat it. You can also take notes during an interview, maybe take a moment to just write a couple notes that will allow you to catch your breath, and maybe, then respond after that. Okay, feel free to share any other unusual or quirky things that have come up for you during interviews. This is just kind of wanted to let you know about a few things here. There are illegal or improper interview questions. So there might be sort of these curveball questions, but there are questions that they are not to ask you. They're illegal questions, and you do not have to respond to anything here. Medical conditions, health issues, anything to do with age-related questions, ethnicity or race. Any questions are legal about disability, religious questions, anything about these are questions you do not have to answer, and they really are illegal and proper for them to ask you during an interview. Family status, if you have children, if you're married, things like that, anything to do with your gender. And more recently, laws have changed here in California. They cannot force you to tell your current salary history. They can ask you about your preferred salary. On Friday, I'm doing a workshop, and Winnie will be there with me again on salary negotiation. A little bit of a different topic, but relevant to interviewing. But you can give a salary, your expected salary range is part of a salary negotiation, but you do not have to give your salary history. Also, we'll talk about this on Friday if you join us. Laws have changed, where now employers have to provide their salary range, what they're going to pay. In some cases, they didn't have to in some parts of the U.S. So they need to provide a range. You can provide your expected range, but you don't have to give your history, your actual salary history. But again, if you are asked any of these questions, I would just try to maybe practice politely, changing the conversation, maybe asking them, I'd like to share more about my accomplishments. We'd like to hear about a project. You just try to shift the conversation, because you do not have to answer any of these improper or illegal questions. Okay, so questions to ask. So it is really important to have questions prepared to ask at an interview. So again, as I mentioned, the very first slide, it's a two-way conversation. Of course, the interviewer is leading the conversation, and they're asking more of the questions, of course. But usually towards the end of the interview, they will ask you, do you have questions for us? And you really need to prepare, 5 or 6 questions. You may not be able to ask all of them depending on the time, but be prepared to ask some questions. And it shows a few things. It shows you've done that research. And at the beginning, we talked about how important it is to do research. Through that research process into the company or organization, you can gather some questions that way. Ask things you're curious about. Here's some examples of typical day, or what some challenging aspects of the job, or what kind of, what do they value most in terms of skills or strengths, things you're just curious about. What do you really want to know about the work environment? What do you really want to know about the team you might be working in, or who's going to be your supervisor, or is there professional development provided, or, what are the things that are important to you that align with your values and your career goals. So have those questions prepared. Shows that you're really enthusiastic about the job, that you took time to put together some questions, and will help you figure out if this is a good fit for you. You want to make sure this is the right environment, work environment, or right opportunity for you and your career goals. So prepare some questions in advance. A really good question always too is like, what are the next steps in the hiring process? You can always ask that at the end, but before that, having some thoughtful questions can really help you stand out. That you took the time to maybe look on their website, ask about some initiatives, really dig deeper into the job description, ask more about that. So it really can help you stand out to have some, thoughtful questions. So that's, again, something that we can help you with the Career Center and help you kind of think through what are those questions that you might want to ask. But definitely that is an important part of it. And hopefully you're not thrown off when they ask you, do you have questions for us? Because that's typically going to come up at some point in the interview phase. Okay, just a few more things here. Being prepared about your professional image is really important. If it's a virtual interview, make sure you've got, you've got things set up, test your volume, have a background or just a plain background there, dress professionally, either for a virtual interview. I think it's also even helpful in a phone interview, just to get a little dressed up, sit at a desk, just so you're kind of in that mindset of, your professional image, even on the phone. And then in person, of course, dressing professionally, being engaged in the conversation. You can see how they're kind of leaning in towards each other. They're smiling, nodding, smiling. Even in a virtual interview, doing those things are important too. And, grooming, getting prepared, what you're going to wear, think about those things in advance can really help you. So think about professional image for virtual and in person, of course. And professional dress. So think in advance about what you're going to wear. I think that's something that I talk to students, but they haven't really thought about it in the day of. You're frantically figuring out what they're going to wear. So plan out your professional attire in advance. You might need more than one professional attire outfit if you have multiple interviews with the same employer. So think about that ahead of time. This slide just shows you some like more traditional business attire versus maybe more business casual. Probably somewhere in the middle is good. Kind of not too formal unless you know that company or organization is very formal and traditional. You maybe would want to do traditional business attire, but probably somewhere in the middle of the business casual and professional attire. You can see that kind of in the middle slides there. Great thing to do, like informational interviewing with maybe alumni working in the company or organization or others in advance, if you could get a sense of the environment and what level of kind of professional attire you need to be prepared for. But definitely you want to have that planned out, organized, ready to go. So that's one less thing you have to worry about on the day of the interview. And don't forget to still dress it professionally for a virtual Zoom or Teams interview as well. And to help you with that, we have our career closet. So you can come to the Career Center. We've moved this semester, or last semester, I guess, to Clark 140 on the first floor. You can come in Monday through Friday and 9:30 to 3, a walk-in time to visit our career closet. We have professional attire there. We have dressing rooms, and you can try on clothes and pick out one professional outfit per semester. And also could prepare you for job fairs, recruitment events, other types of things. And we also have our headshot as well, professional headshots for like your LinkedIn profiles and things like that. But that's available in the Career Center. So come check that out and to help you get ready for your interviews. And if I'm seeing any questions. Okay, maybe we'll come back to the questions in a moment. Okay, so check out our career closet. Some last tips. So for in-person interviews, you want to arrive maybe about 10 minutes early, get settled in, make sure that you're respectful and polite and friendly to everybody you come across. If it's a receptionist, if it's a security person at the door of the building, just friendly, respectful to everybody. It's still a good idea to bring copies of a resume. You might want to bring like a little folder just in case maybe someone on a panel interview just hasn't had the chance to look at your resume. So just bring a few copies for that. And then, as I already mentioned, for virtual, you want to set up your kind of virtual studio in advance, making sure your audio and everything's working correctly. And, making eye contact in person or looking at the camera if it's virtual. And dressing, grooming professionally, thinking about nonverbal cues. Again, making sure this is a good thing, why it's good to do recording of yourself, to make sure you're smiling, you're nodding, using gestures. So think about that. If it's in person, that you're sitting up and you're kind of leaning into the conversation. So practicing those nonverbal body language pieces are important. And then practicing your questions, and then always follow up after an interview. It's really important to do a follow-up after the interview. And a little bit more about following up. So when you're leaving, make sure you thank everyone, make eye contact, make sure you've got their contact information. If they have business cards, pick those up so you know how to follow up with them, express your enthusiasm, for the job at the end. Right away, when you're get home or log off, take some notes. So what went well in the interview? What maybe would you want to do differently? What were those tricky questions that came up, unusual questions or behavioral questions or something that you kind of caught you off guard? Take notes and then think about what you need to practice, work a little more on, before your next interview. So right away, what's fresh in your mind, take some notes and think about some next steps to help you get ready for your next interview. And then right away, within the first day or maybe probably the first 24 hours is best to send a thank you email to everybody that interviewed you. So that's why it's important to get contact information. If it's a panel interview or one-on-one interview, send a thank you email expressing your enthusiasm for the job, thanking them for the time, maybe something you forgot to share about an accomplishment or an experience that you've had. You can just very short, very small, short paragraph, or you could connect with them on LinkedIn, maybe send them a message that way. So just follow up right away, expressing your interest, your continued interest, and thanking them for their time, and that you hope to hear from them soon, or some kind of way of closing the thank you note. So that is super important to do that. Okay, here's our resources. So Winnie's going to share some links in chat, and then Winnie, if you don't mind sharing again, just to make sure everybody's signed. Oh, here, she's already done. Okay, fast. Thank you very much. Okay. So maybe some questions here, and then maybe share the check-in form again, just in case somebody missed that. Can't think of a single time. Okay, the job I applied for asked about disabilities. I was honest, but I'm worried that they will ask me to elaborate. Oh, yeah, maybe this might be something we can connect on offline here. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. Perhaps would you mind sending me an email? Yeah, that kind of situation, it sounds like you maybe disclosed some disability, so maybe we could talk about this offline. But I think that they really, if they're asking you right away and you haven't disclosed that, it's something you do not have to respond to at that point. But I would try to move the conversation into something else and then wait to appropriate time if you do require some kind of accommodations. But that really does not have to come up until you are offered a job. Yes. So thank you for the question about multiple interviews. So yes, so you phone screen, short little email, in person. Yeah. Each time acknowledge, thank them for their time, express your interest in progressive process of the interviews. So each time, just some kind of acknowledgement, even if it's just a very short email. Okay. Any other questions? We've got a few more minutes, so please check out these resources. So interviewing guide is one of our career guides. We have a series of career guides, if you're not aware, on the Career Center website. We have a resume guide, we have a LinkedIn guide, lots of different guides are all downloadable, PDF, printable, whatever works for you guides. So the interviewing guide goes through many of the types of questions and topics we discussed today in the workshop. You also receive the slides. So that is a good place to get started. Just, kind of getting organized for your interviews is read through our guide. There's some parts of it are actually fillable, so you can put in some notes like how you want to respond to certain types of questions there. And then the big interview has, you use your single sign-on, student sign-on for big interview. And that is really comprehensive curriculum on interview prep. Lots of videos you can watch, including a whole section on salary negotiation. I touched on that earlier. Tips on how to respond to behavioral questions. Some really good videos on how to kind of work with your nerves, being nervous, and how to stay calm. And so really comprehensive. Plus, it has the ability for you to pick types of questions and record yourself. So for sure, you want to check out Big Interview. Again, linked on the Career Center website. Also, Winnie has provided you the link there. And the bottom is how you can schedule and Spark Connect. So as graduate students, since I'm the liaison to College of Graduate Studies, when you go into your Spark Connect, you will see me as the contact for Career Center, and you can schedule with me. You can also send me a direct email if you want to just kind of chat a little bit in email about interviewing, or you have questions. You can also just contact me that way. Okay, and I think I saw maybe something else here, but something strange has happened. There we go. Okay, and we could please fill out the form. Yeah, so if you fill out that form, we will send you the slides and the recording. So thank you for that. All right. So we've got a couple minutes. If anybody has any other questions, here's just general information about the Career Center. As I mentioned, we're in Clark Hall. If you want to come to the Career Closet or get a headshot, or if you want to come for an in-person appointment, that's where you would go. If you have general questions about resources, events, career help at sjsu.edu is good. Our general mailbox if you have questions about anything coming up. Check out our events and Handshake also on our events calendar. As I mentioned, we've got one more job fair next week on Tuesday. And then, check out our website. The QR code takes you there. We've got a lot of resources on our website. The guides, career guides I mentioned, all our digital tools, Handshake, Big Interview. We've got VMOC for resume review. So all those things are available on the Career Center website. So thank you all for being here. Feel free to, if there's any other last minute questions, we can stay on for a couple of minutes. Then thank you again and hope to see you at some of our events or at an appointment coming up soon. And best to all of you if you have interviews coming up. Hope all goes well and keep us updated for any kind of support